is where you are, and where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Long before all of creation, all that I see, you stood alone in your glory eternally. Then with a word you created galaxies formed at your feet. You're the highest of all, you're as high as can be. Glorified on the throne, give praise to the King. All of heaven bows down in worship to thee. Lord, you are, oh Lord, by far highest of all. Who, Lord, can fathom your power, mercy, and grace? Raining your blessings upon us all of our days. Love beyond all understanding, humbly we offer our praise. You're the highest of all, you're as high as can be. Glorified on the throne, give praise to the King. All of heaven bows down in worship to thee. Lord, you are, oh Lord, by far. You're the highest of all, you're as high as can be. Glorified on the throne, give praise to the King. All of heaven bows down in worship to thee. Lord, you are, oh Lord, by far highest of all. Yes, Lord, you are highest of all.
So much for being here this evening. We are going to be going to our Bible classes in just a few minutes, but we want to begin by mentioning some folks who are in need of prayer and then some upcoming events. Wes Ray went to Georgetown Hospital yesterday with a subdural hematoma, and he had a surgical procedure today to put in a drain. That went well. They're monitoring him, but he'll be there in Georgetown Hospital for a few days. Tina Caffey is recovering from surgery, but further tests that they did on the tissue that they harvested has shown that she now has some further cancer to deal with. She'll have another surgery on May the 5th. So let's keep her in prayers. Also want to mention that Russ Ray mentioned to us last Sunday morning that his cancer had returned. So you want to mention that. Juanita Bullard had surgery yesterday to receive a pacemaker. That went really well. She's now at home. Vernell Fuller is going to be having cataract surgery upcoming. So I do want to mention that to you. We want to continue to pray for Haviland Mitchell. She's now home. Is that correct? Still home? She came home doing a little better. Let's keep her in prayers. Sandy Chambers, home and starting to feel a little better. Paul Linton is headed to Pennsylvania right now. He's going to be in a treatment facility for 30 days. And so we're very thankful for that, thankful that he has this opportunity and is taking this opportunity. Let's be keeping him in prayers as he enters this treatment facility. And if we have any contact information where we can show him our support, we'll pass that on as soon as we have it. So we do want to remember him as well. So many others that we have on our list. There are others that are not listed that we know we've been praying for. Let's be praying for everyone by name, day by day. Let's not forget our expectant mothers. Joanna Binkley is due soon, this month. And then Katya Sullivan in August, Megan White in September, and Jessica Avery also in September. Let's keep all of our expectant mothers in our prayers. Our Spanish-speaking ladies will be having a Bible class this Saturday at 10 a.m. to noon. Of course, all of our ladies are invited to join. That's here at the building. Young adults are going to be going bowling on Sunday the 16th. That's after service, I'm assuming. And so RSVP to Mike or Caitlin Coots. Also Sunday, Oklahoma Christian University is going to be visiting the Fairfax Church of Christ from 11:30 to 1:30. And there's a link in your announcements for more info. Also, we do want to mention that on the 17th, this coming Monday the 17th, we'll be having Monday night for the Master. And Monday night for the Master is going to be absolutely and completely devoted to preparation for Dorcas Day on the 22nd. So a lot of work to do. That's 6 to 8 on Monday. And so we don't want to mention that. Also, on the 22nd, bridal shower for Ashley Fancher, 10 a.m. to noon. Details are in your announcements. Other upcoming April event, men's prayer breakfast on the 29th, congregational potluck on the 30th. So we do want to mention those events to you as well. Okay. At this time, let's lift our voices together and sing praise to God.
Barry left me one additional announcement to make about the Relay for Life sneakers. We're trying to take your old, gently used sneakers and turn them in for money for the American Cancer Society. So bring them. There's a bin in the back. You can bring them in, put them there. Every 15 we get, we bag them up and send them off, and they send us money back. Okay, so they recycle the sneakers. So bring in your sneakers. I know you all have old sneakers in your closet, because I do. Okay, so I know they're out there. Bring them in, and we'll get rid of them. All right, our first song tonight is going to be song number 1 in the songbook, or behind me, A Beautiful Life. By the way, our kids were at L to L, Lads to Leaders this last weekend. If you see them, shake their hand. They're the ones that may be wearing the Lads to Leaders shirts, and some of them aren't, but you probably know who they are. Just shake their hand and tell them what a good job they did, because they did a fantastic job. I hope some of you have seen the pictures on Facebook. That just captured a mere essence of it, okay? There's so much that went on there. It was hard to describe in just a few pictures. But anyway, shake their hands, and we're very proud of them. Our first song, A Beautiful Life. Each day I'll do a golden deed by helping those who are in need. My life on earth is but a span, and so I'll do the best I can. Like sleeping sun is taking low, a Our next song is 345. If you're following along in the book, it is Well With My Soul. 345. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to his cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the face shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
Would you pray with me? Our dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this wonderful day you've blessed us with to come before you and to learn more about you. Help us to go into the world this week, take what we've learned tonight and to teach it to others, to bring more to you and to be that shining light to everyone around us. When they see us, they see you. I ask all these things in your Son's name I pray. Amen.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone here this evening, especially if you're visiting with us, and we do have visitors here with us this evening. Thank you so much for being here. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to be reading chapters 3 and 4 in just a little bit. I want to take a minute, though, to say thank you to the two men who filled in for me while we were gone. Dave Binkley filled in for me a couple of Wednesday nights ago and talked to us about the whole notion of wisdom from the book of Proverbs. And then last week, John Huddleston took us to the very end of the book of Proverbs and looked at the woman of virtue, the wife of virtue, of value. And I really appreciate the job both of them did. I think it was an important bit of backtracking for us to go back to the book of Proverbs and listen to what wisdom. Solomon didn't write the 31st chapter and probably didn't write the first chapters of the book of Proverbs either, but Proverbs is most heavily associated with him, and he's the primary source of the book of Proverbs. And so as we read what he writes in the Ecclesiastes, when he calls into question the value of wisdom time and again, and as he reminds us that one of the great gifts we have in our life to enjoy is to have each other, to have that one person that you build your life with, and he'll talk about that tonight. Those are topics that have already been discussed in the book of Proverbs, and I think Proverbs is a good lens for us to use as we deal with the things that he says in the book of Ecclesiastes. Let's not forget how we've introduced the book. The book of Ecclesiastes is written by, I believe, Solomon. I don't think anybody else fits the bill in human history. Someone who was king in Jerusalem, someone who was descended from King David, someone who had unlimited resources of money and power, and who had an unlimited resource of wisdom at his disposal. And so he has taken it upon himself to use his life as an experiment, which he describes in chapters 1 and 2, to answer the question that he asks in the very first verses, which is, what is profitable for us to be doing here under the sun? And he's limited his research to under the sun. Although, as we'll see tonight, we have eternity in our hearts and we can never fully take it out of the equation. But he's looking around and he's not looking up. And we got to remember that too. And I wanted us to begin this evening by reading Psalm 8. Psalm 8, another one of those psalms written by his dad. His worldview in Ecclesiastes is not the worldview that his father had. And I think the difference is this. In Ecclesiastes, he's looking around. He's not looking up. David was always looking up and understanding that the Father who lives beyond this universe sees us and cares for us. Psalm 8. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? You have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, crowned him with glory and honor. You've given him dominion over the works of your hands and put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen and beasts of the field, birds of the heavens and fish of the sea, and whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. This is written for the choir master. This was sung publicly in the worship at the tabernacle and then later the temple. It's something that, this is a song that Solomon would have known very well. And it so contrasts with what we're going to be reading tonight. And I think the difference is that David, as he does in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, is looking up. And he's not misanthropic. And it's not because he's naive, because he isn't. Because we know the life that he's lived. We know the sins that he himself has committed. He is positive because he understands that God loves us. And that gives us value. God has given us value. We don't have value in ourselves, by ourselves. But God has created us, and God has loved us, and God has made us a little lower than the heavenly beings, the angels, the King James says, and has given us dominion over the beasts of the field, all the animals of the earth. Solomon tonight is not going to be so sure that we're any better off than they are in his musings, in his thought process, and I believe, as we note in chapters 3 and 4, it's because he's not looking up; he's looking around, because the things that he says about human beings are true. But you can take the same set of facts and see them in different lights. We began our study of Ecclesiastes by looking at Psalm 90, which is very much related to, very much in the tone of the book of Ecclesiastes, Psalm 90 by Moses. And then Psalm 103, which is a commentary on Psalm 90, which quotes Psalm 90 and refers to it several times. David, taking the same set of facts, that the human race is as flawed and as sinful and as ridiculous and as unjust as you say it is, Moses. And we don't deserve that the Lord would care about us at all, just like you say. And yet he does. And it's not as bad as you have described it. And the contrast between David's take on the same set of facts from Moses before him and then Solomon after him is just, it's important for us to remember that there's a different way to look at the same set of facts, and that Solomon is working through things, and that we're getting his thought process as it happens. And he's not going to figure things out all at once, and so we have to be patient with him. And I know that over the course of our study so far, sometimes some of us have gotten a little frustrated with him and said, why didn't he see this and why didn't he see that? Well, he will. He'll figure it out. He's wiser than you and I will ever be, although that wisdom didn't keep him from squandering much of his life. So let's be patient with him, and with me too, because I'm just reading what he wrote, and we're talking about it. We're going to read chapters 3 and 4 and talk about them this evening. We have, at the beginning of chapter 3, perhaps the best known section of the book of Ecclesiastes, and one of the best known passages in all the Bible. It was a hit song. Pete Seeger wrote it as a folk song, but then the Byrds released it back in the 60s, and it was a #1 song. And it still gets a lot of airplay. We'll recognize it. There are other songs that connect, popular songs, I think, that connect with this section. God has made everything beautiful in its time, That's the source of Ray Stevens' song, Everything is Beautiful, which was a hit in the early 70s. And then there are some others that we'll mention when we get there. We also have, in the middle of chapter 4, the first glimmer of real understanding. And we see some light and some evolution, but we really are, evolution in his thought, but we really are at a very low point here. I mean, he has spent his life testing everything that human beings can do. And he's going to have some hard things to say about humans as a species on the planet, and they're all true. But other things are true too. And it's going to take him a while to add that understanding back into his equation of things. And I don't know that he ever gets to the place that his father is in Psalm 23 or Psalm 131. But he comes to some conclusions that we can bank on as absolutely true. Let's read chapters 3 and 4. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. I'm reading the ESV, by the way. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people may fear him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. And I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart, with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward, and the spirit of the beast goes into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Again I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought of the dead, who are already dead. They were more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw that all toil and skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity, and striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after the wind. Again I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who moved about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who came later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and striving after the wind. Okay, this really is a unit, 3 and 4. He's going to start giving us advice in chapter 5. He's not going to stop having dark moments, and he's not going to stop questioning things that make us a little uncomfortable. But we really are at a low point in chapters 3 and 4, especially when he says we're no better than animals, none of us. And then he says, who knows whether the Spirit, and by Spirit, he's describing the life force, that which is alive in us. He's not saying that dogs and cats have souls like people do. He's saying, who knows that the spirit of man is going to go up and not down, and the spirit of the animal is not going to go. Who knows that And he asked that question, and this is just the polar opposite of the end of Psalm 23. And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David knows this to be true. He has absolute confidence in eternal life with the Lord. And Solomon, his own son, says in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, we're no better than animals. From dust to dust, we're all going to die. And who knows that our spirit is going to go up to heaven to be with the Lord and not go down. Yes?
So, after reading these, you want to take impressions.
Yeah.
Except, for everything except, it just seems like when he talks about being together,
Yeah.
it's like that's the only uplifting part of
Yeah.
these two chapters.
Yeah.
Kind of giving this positive, don't do things
Yeah.
stay warm together.
Yeah.
The fall, someone
Yeah.
it just seems like you start
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I really do. I get the feeling this time around reading this book and reading it and reading it and reading it over and over again. I really get the feeling that in his head, or maybe I've got that part backwards, but there's part of him that looks around at the way we are. And he's just like Moses in Psalm 90. We don't deserve anything. We're the worst, and we get that full bore. But he cannot repress that in him that can, even in those moments, see things that are good. I mean, he hasn't given up on the notion that God will judge. He mentions that. He hasn't given up on the notion that even if this is all we have, God has still given us a gift. We can still take joy in the work that we have. And we can still take joy in building a relationship with that one person, And he keeps coming back to that. So to me, I used to see this as somebody who was just, trying to, put a wet blanket on the fire. And now I think it's somebody for whom, the embers are still burning and they're welling up. I mean, he's completely, despairing of humanity as a species. He can't fully let go of the fact that God still is giving us gifts, and even in this dark, dark moment, to me it's still there. So, and we want to look at this. We have two more. Yeah, Margaret and then Travis. Margaret.
Just say, I know this is the word of God. I'm not trying to differ with that. But even in the darkest moments, you can, let yourself just resign and let the devil win and say there is nothing.
Yeah.
It's all gray. But it's better to have loved and been hurt and lost and go forward and know God. It's like that song, He healed me in the night, speaking of God. He wakes you up to a new dawn.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, Travis.
My father always used to tell me and my brothers and the church the idea that when he was on the farm and they had to water the animals, that they always had to put the water in the buckets and they would carry the stick across their backs to carry the two buckets. And as you walked along, oftentimes you would spill a little bit. And he would always tell us that those two buckets is our mind and what we put into it.
Yeah.
Solomon was one of those individuals that was so well known and popular that any and everybody who wanted their philosophy to receive credit wanted to talk to the man who was supposed to be the smartest man. And I think that he surrounded himself with so many people that wanted to do that he wasn't getting that counterbalance of those around him who observed Jehovah. And to me, as he put these things together, it was at some point of his life where the 3/4 of the dial was in the direction of being influenced too much by this group. But knowing that there was something innate in him that kept tugging at him to say, whoa, there's something right here. And I think that for us today, this is what we have to be careful about. How much we spend time in things that aren't building us up closer to God.
Absolutely.
Opposed to putting in our buckets the things that are going to spill out that could be embarrassing.
Absolutely. And that's why, and I love the way you phrased that, it's, he really is in this closed loop, or he's put himself in this closed loop where he's looking around. He's not looking up. He's not looking up at God. That's why I think this book is so important. And I got Robert here in just a second. For this moment, when more and more people are questioning faith, denying the existence of God, denying, saying that God is not needed, that everything he says about humanity is true. If you can't look up and find meaning, this is what we're left with. I mean, he's making, seriously, if there is no God, then what he says in his darkest moments, that's who we are. Because if all you can do is look around, then he's made his case. But we look up. Yes, Robert.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. You're bad-mouthing this book and the way that he puts it together. But he's writing this book knowing that the end is chapter 12.
That's right. That's right.
And that's the meaning of life. Why are we here?
Yeah.
To fear God.
I know.
When he starts his book, he knows the end already. And Proverbs 14:12, where it talks about there's ways he's writing the man and ways he's dead. That's the whole point of the 11 chapters of this book.
It is. And I'm not bad-mouthing the book. I love the book.
What you just said is exactly right. The whole reason he's given us this is to tell us that very thing.
That's right. And like we said at the very beginning, the book only has to be four verses long. But then we wouldn't have learned anything. And this case that he makes, I mean, there were times in our history when this was not, the first tool in our tool belt we would have pulled out. But it's becoming that today, especially for younger people, a new generation that doesn't find meaning in religion, doesn't find meaning in faith. If you can't, this is what you're left with. I mean, he just makes, because everything he says about humanity is true. There's no better argument against humanism in the classical sense of that word than this book, because it's all absolutely true. I want to talk about the sections generally. I mean, point by point, not verse by verse. But we talked at the beginning of the class. I had a couple of quotes from the play Our Town, which Chris and Teresa and I. Where's Chris? He's in here somewhere. Oh no, he's teaching. Went and saw. It's a wonderful, indestructible, amazing play. But anyway, there's a girl. She's about, she gets married. She dies in childbirth, and in the last scene, it's her burial, and of course the main characters in the last scene are the dead, and they're talking to each other, and she knows that she can relive a day in her life, and they tell her not to do it, and she goes back, and she can't handle it because she sees how fast we live our lives and how we don't really notice what's going on around us. And there's a character, Simon Stimson, who's the church organist, who's also an alcoholic, and he's had a terrible life. You never know why, but we know that he's dealt with a lot of terrible things, and he ends up committing suicide, which we find out in this act. Anyway, when she comes back, Simon Stimson, he says, now you know that's what it was to be alive, to move about in a cloud of ignorance, to go up and down trampling on the feelings of others, of those about you, to spend and waste time as though you had 1,000,000 years, to always be at the mercy of one self-centered passion or another. Now you know that that's the happy existence you wanted to go back to, ignorance and blindness. Well, that's one voice from Song of Solomon. But then her mother-in-law speaks she says, Simon Stimson, that's not the whole truth, and you know it. And then she says, Emily, look at the star. Look up at that star. I forget its name. And she calls her to look up. And I wanted to read that because it is quite literally what we're talking about. She didn't say it's not true. She says it's not the whole truth. And all the bad things that Solomon says about human beings, they're true. And if we don't look up, the heavens are declaring the glory of God. If we don't look up and see God and know that there is a God and know that there's something beyond us, this is all we're left with. And that's why this is such an important book and will be increasingly important, I think, as our children, have children and as the next generation grows up. I think my grandchildren, mine and Chuck's granddaughters, Zoe and Noelle, when they get to be in high school and college, this is even going to be more important as we try to reach that generation. Okay, let's talk about the passage. I don't know how to take verse 8, but I feel good about it, and I'm not going to question that. Most people do. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. To everything there is a season. There's a lot of bad stuff in there, like hate and war and killing, and we know that, and we're for one and again the other, generally speaking, but over the years, people have found comfort in these verses. And part of that is the beauty of the language. And we never lose the beauty of the language throughout the entire book. And that survives translation into any language. But part of that is behind the wheel that turns is the person who created the wheel and designed it to turn. I think the comfort that we get from verses 1 through 8 is the way every word of it reinforces that there is a God, and that God has ordered the universe thus, and that there is someone we can depend upon, all the way back to the creation. I'm putting lights in the sky for times and seasons and days and years, or at the end, when the rainbow came out, God says, harvest time, planting time, it's all going to be, I'm not going to destroy this again. There is that which we can depend upon in our universe, that it is following the path that God has written for it. The castaway stones, his own father quite famously cast a stone into the head of a giant, casting away stones, projectiles of war, gathering stones together to build. Verse 8, love, hate, war, and peace. It begins with love and it ends in peace, which is turning things around. And I think it's intentional. It's a bit of a chiasm there. John talked to you about chiasms. There's a chiasm at the end of chapter 4, but using the words I saw, and I thought, and I thought, and I saw. Anyway, but that there, the turning of time, the wheel of time, and there's a time for every purpose. And I think there is beauty in this because he says there is. Verse 11, God has made everything beautiful in its time. When the universe runs the way God designed it to run, everything in it is beautiful. I mean, so he's finding, he can't get away from that. But then there's also this, and I've always been intrigued by this. God has put eternity into man's heart. It's hard to translate to where it makes sense, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't exactly follow what he's saying after that. Yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to end. It's not really a sentence that flows, but we get the notion that God's put eternity in our hearts, but he's not given us access to everything, to all the information. And I'm wondering, reading through it this time over and over again, is he a little irritated, this man who is wiser than any man who's ever lived, that he can't find all the answers? Is that part of his, I don't know. But he says God has put eternity in our hearts. We have an awareness of something beyond the universe, something that is beyond time, that someone is beyond the universe and beyond time. Robert Coles, years ago, decades ago now, wrote a wonderful book called The Spiritual Life of Children. He was a Harvard child psychologist, not a man of faith. He was just studying children, and he's wanting to know, are there concepts that we are born having about God? And that if we, and he basically came to the conclusion you have to learn to be an atheist. That almost as soon as a child can communicate, a child communicates their awareness of a personal God. That they have an awareness almost from the time they're 18 months. And he would let children draw their pictures, and it's an amazing book. It's came out maybe early 80s, late 70s, The Spiritual Life of Children. It's just science confirming what he says. God has put eternity into our hearts. And then he says, he calls us them. He calls humanity them. People are them. It's almost like he's so fed up with us. There's the beauty of God, and then there's us. And he's calling us them. There's nothing better that they should do. What should they do? I perceive there is nothing better for them than to just be happy and do good. Well, that's the conclusion he comes to at the end, But this is a resignation, not a conclusion in this verse. Just do good as long as you live, and eat and drink and take pleasure in your work. This is God's gift to man. And it is. We've said he's taking us back to the garden all the time and saying the real joy that we have in life are the things that we had from the very beginning. God's provided us water to drink, food to eat, occupation for our time and our abilities, and each other. And in these two chapters, he's going to say that. He's going to say, this is the true joy that we have in life. And then we have this appreciation of that God. Yeah, God is that eternal thing that's in our hearts, that person, that awareness. The awareness of the eternal in our hearts is the awareness of God. God endures. Whatever he does endures. Nothing can be added to it. God has done it. And then verse 15, that's a difficult verse to translate as well. The very last phrase, God seeks what has been driven away. That's one take on the words. It can mean that God brings the wanderers home, it can mean a variety of things. But that's the choice that they have made. That God is bringing the wanderers home. I'm looking at my notes to see about the other ones, and I've noticed that I've turned to the wrong set of notes. Or that God brings the past into account. That's the other thing that it can mean. It can be translated that God brings back what has already passed. In other words, he's going to judge the past. But these translators have made the choice that what it means is that God is going to seek that which is lost, that which has been driven away. Yes, Margaret?
Children, these are my own words, not based on the scriptures, but we have, as you voiced a moment ago, people always saying, well, how is God communicating with you? And just now when you said someone was looking for answers, maybe part of the answer is that we need to get out of our own way.
Yeah.
Children are pure.
Yeah.
They listen to God. They know God's hand and everything. How do I say this right? If we will be quiet and totally from our heart, we all come together to worship, and I don't mean to be offensive when I say this, but we all come together to worship. We truly want to worship God. We love the Lord and everything. But if something happens, we're afraid. And so the thought occurred to me not too long ago, why? Why are we afraid of that? If we all our lives worship God, now, this is the ultimate where we want to be in heaven. Now, why is it we don't trust Him?
Yeah.
When a catastrophe hits us or something happens, not everybody, there are many good souls I admire that just trust in the Lord. But sometimes we're in our own way, when we get upset, or we think in our own knowledge that our way is better, we need to just be quiet and listen to the Lord and get out of our own way and just turn everything over to Him and be quiet and listen. And then we might find those answers that everybody's speaking of.
Yep. Chapter 4, verse 6. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after the wind. I think that's an important point, Margaret, and I think that's the point that we need to take from the next huge section of the passage, which is chapter 3, verse 16 through chapter 4, verse 7, where he just over and over again just tells us how bad things are. There's no justice, there's injustice everywhere. There is oppression everywhere, the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comfort. There's power on the side of the oppressors. And even when we do accomplish something, why have we done it? To be better than somebody else. I'll never forget, back when we were living in St. Clairsville, and years ago, this is how long ago this was, Barry Bonds and Bobby Bonilla were both playing for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Bobby Bonilla left first, got a big contract. And we wanted to keep Barry Bonds, but we couldn't pay him enough because he wanted to make more than Bobby Bonilla. Because he said, I'm better than Bobby Bonilla, and I should make more money than Bobby Bonilla. And I was so incensed at that. And yet, Solomon says almost all of human accomplishment, in fact, what he says is all of human accomplishment, but that's an exaggeration, is about somebody trying to be better than somebody else. And that is a waste of time. And then he says, and then you got this guy who works and works and works, and he's got nobody to work for. And no matter how much he makes, he's not satisfied with it. That's all true. That's all true about humanity. And in the middle of it, he says, at the end of chapter 3, I saw there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work. That is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? He says to take joy. He said that 3 times before. He's going to say it frequently, to take joy. He's continuing to tell us to take joy in what we have here. Is that dependent upon justice and the end to oppression and goodwill between human beings over the planet and peace between nations and peace in our neighborhoods? Is that is our joy dependent upon those things? Evidently not, because in the middle of all these things that are facts about humanity, he says we can still take joy in the things that God gives us. That's an enormous lesson. We don't have to fix everything to count our blessings and to take joy in the life that we have and to say, God has given me this. Yes, Julia.
I think while you were reading that, what I thought of is the prodigal son, because, both of those sons were living in the house with their father, as we do with our kids. Some people are going to go some way, other people are going to go another way. And it talks about, the idea of what has already been is what will be before, and God will call it the past. The there's just nothing new that's going to happen. But the crazy thing about God is that he sees into our hearts and he sees all time. And I feel like, I don't really know how to put it into words, but I feel like Solomon is kind of hitting the nail on the head at the point of that story. Because that story is time. It's happening today. And just the idea that God will judge, and our job is not to judge other people. Our job is to do the best that we can do. Because I think even the prodigal son was doing the best that he could do. He thought what he was supposed to do with his life is take his inheritance and go and have fun. That's what he thought. Because above, that's what, I don't know what song was that. He's like, no, we just should go and eat and drink and like whatever. But what the prodigal son finds out is there's something so wonderful about being in the home with the Father. And so he comes back and he begs for forgiveness. And the whole comment about, wickedness is here and justice is there, and how do you tell the difference? I think Solomon's driving at the whole complexity of that story of you're sitting there, why does the prodigal son get the same benefit as the son that stayed with the father and with that? But I think that there's just something so powerful about putting the two together.
And I love that you, Julia, that you have juxtaposed the prodigal son to the book of Ecclesiastes, because the prodigal son, and prodigal means to wander, by the way. The prodigal son very much over a shorter period of time, conducted the same experiment. I mean, he just did. But the older son was no closer to his dad. I mean, there are two lost sons in that story. And the older son, he's measuring himself against his brother, and he's angry, and he hasn't taken joy in the gifts that he has. Whereas the younger son, or the one who wandered, the younger son, he comes to his senses and realizes the joy that he has. The older one hasn't ever done that yet. Yes. And I do think that this book, even though it doesn't say the word grace, it makes us fully aware of our need for grace, and that grace is the answer that we're ultimately looking for. Another thing that I want us to notice is that in his world that he's living in, if there's somebody with power who could be an oppressor, if there's somebody who has worked to be better than anybody before him, who would it be? It's him. I mean, the man that just wanted to be better, that's him. How many times is he describing himself? And this last, and I know that says we got 4 more minutes, and I'm taking 4 minutes. Verses 13 and following, when he talks about a poor king, and he says, this poor king, this poor boy ended up taking the place of the king, led the people, innumerable and mobile numbers of people. That's a good thing. He did better. That's great. But you know what? Nobody remembered after he was gone. He's not saying that it was not better to be good. He's saying that don't expect your reward for being good right here on this planet, because it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Ultimately, we are dependent upon the eternity that we don't yet understand. We understand it better than he could have, because we have the New Testament. But I don't want us to leave before we get to verse 9, and I just want us to leave with this, because to me, this is he's told us just enjoy the gifts you have now. He's told us that, but it sounded like resignation almost up to this point. But then in verse 9, to me, this is the first time that we start to see the ember flame up, and light come into the room. And it comes after he talks about how vain it is to work just for yourself and then not even enjoy it while you're working. He says, 2 are better than 1. because they have a reward for their toil. Your toil, of course, that's the question, How do you use your resources? How do you spend your time and your energies? It's better if there are two of you. And I think he means two. And I think primarily husband and wife, but not necessarily only husband and wife. I don't think he's talking about a community. I think he's talking about finding someone that is more important to you than you. Finding someone that you go through life with. Parent, child, if it works out that way, once I don't know. He's talking about having a partner. If they fall, one will lift up his fellow. Woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Two lie together, they keep warm. And then he goes, a man might prevail against one, but not against two. Then the threefold cord is not quickly broken. He doesn't identify what the third cord is, but we have always assumed, and I think rightly so, that the third cord is God himself, who makes that bond possible. God makes it possible for us to love someone more than we love ourselves, because that's the way he loves us. I think that's exactly what he's talking about in verse 12. Yes, Audra.
To that point, it's reiterated in the New Testament, where two are gathered.
Yeah.
And you made the statement earlier that this book is going to become more and more important as we continue for our kids and their children. Yes, and the reason why is because of that verse. It's relationship.
It is.
Relationship with friend or spouse or child. And with God, and making sure that you keep that as your focus so that you can find joy.
Absolutely. And when I say for our kids, I don't mean our elementary school kids, because this is college level stuff. But I mean when you're 19, 20, 21 years old and you're in school, or you've gone off to the job, or you're not in your mom and dad's home anymore. You got into the service and you're having to deal with people questioning who you are and your values, and you're being bombarded with competing value systems, and you're having to figure it out on your own. During any cultural period, that's hard enough. But during a cultural period in which faith, and particularly Christian faith, is being reviled, rejected, we shouldn't be surprised. That's going to happen. The whole New Testament tells us that's going to happen, so we shouldn't be surprised at it. But that's why this book is so important, because it really brings to light the logical conclusion of not being able to look up and know that God is there. And I mean that in a physical sense, to see the heavens that declare the glory of God. To not be able to look up and know that God is there, then this is all you have. And if this is all we have, then all of our self-awareness is pointless. We're no better than the animals. We're just not. Anyway, well, yes.
Maybe this is real obvious, but he's looking around instead of looking up because he made the decision to stop looking up.
He did. Absolutely, he did. He did. I mean, he had more wisdom than anyone, and we have benefited from it in this book. But Sam asked, the first week where we were together, what was the point if you're going to waste your life this way? And anyway, okay, chapter 5 and 6 next week. We're going to get a lot more of the diagnosis of humanity without God, and also some more insights. His dealing with the information of his lifetime experiment. It's in the process of being refined, and so we're going to learn a little more and more and more until we get to chapters 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, and then he's going to bring this ship home and be able to tell us his conclusion. Okay. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for your listening. Thank you for your comments. We'll pick up there next time.
Rejoice.